Why are we doing this?
Did you airbrush this? Is this airbrushed?
Yes.
Oh,
I mean,
no. I'm gonna dock you points for that.
Alright, dock you points for that.
Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, that's true. That was a big thing. Yeah, we would get people would question that as if it was like a weird,
like a lesser form of being.
No, but originally it was like it was like, wow, you airbrushed that.
Yeah.
For like a time, and then it became
very brief.
And then it became, this guy just airbrushed. This guy's has no talent, no class, no talent.
No class is the big one for sure. Classless fiend.
And now it's like it's just accepted.
Now it's just like kind of like part of the general sort of. Hello everyone, welcome to another Lords of War games and hobbies. We have both of those things. Video
discussion. Yeah,
this is with Chris and Jay. We're gonna just. Right at the front, remind you, I usually do this at the end of the video, but I'm supposed to do it at the beginning. Remind you about hitting the like and subscribe. Helps us out a ton. And if you want to check us out on Patreon, we'd be greatly appreciative of that. You can check that in the description.
Right, because you might not watch the whole video.
You definitely not going to watch all of it.
Yeah.
So, today we just kind of wanted to talk about sort of the whole, I don't know, like greater culture of airbrushing that kind of surrounds the Warhammer or the miniature hobby in general.
Yeah. So,
and maybe even like discuss some algorithmically favorable topics such as things we wish we knew when we started.
Yeah. That's exactly. Yeah. And I mean, based on the fact that we still regularly sell airbrushes, almost weekly or whatever, then there's still lots of people that don't own one.
So
or whatever.
Take us back, because we kind of just joked a little bit in the intro there about. Sort of like we kind of went through the generation of like adoption, like the beginning where like it was kind of like shock value to the point where it was kind of being rejected by a lot of purists.
Yeah, and
then to the point we're at now where it's like just like gladly like normalized. I almost want to say, and to the point where like we sell multiple airbrushes a week. We do like lessons, and it's just kind of a normally accepted thing in the hobby.
Yeah, sure. I would say if I had to pick a year, it was early 2000s, maybe like 2005, 6, 7, somewhere around then. Prior to that, you basically never saw anything airbrushed. And it's not like airbrushes didn't exist. They certainly did. It's not a complicated tool. It's been around for decades or more, or maybe longer. And anyway, so in the hobby world, it was basically like the Games Workshop kind of like method, or in a hobby world, in the tabletop wargaming world. I think people were airbrushing like model trains and cars for probably some time.
Yeah, once again, people from other hobbies kind of like laugh at wargamers for being like, check out, do you ever see this cool technology? And they're just like, I've been using oil washes for 100 years or whatever. Yeah. We're always the last ones to discover this stuff.
Maybe because the average wargamer is like not, maybe they enter the hobby for the game reason or something, or because it's their friends are playing it, and so they don't actually they're not aware of,
or like Games Workshop being the primary filter for entering it. Like there's no airbrushes
and that was a big thing. Right? That's a really good point. Because most of us may have entered through the Games Workshop method, and they don't, there's no airbrush in the store. They don't talk about airbrushes. They don't even acknowledges their existence, and because they don't plan to carry them or sell them or any of that, which is fine. And so sometime, again, in the early noughts, or whatever you want to call it, it started to show up in, like, I would say things like Golden Demon and, like, army displays and at tournaments. And at first it was like a pretty wow thing. I remember you'd see something and everyone would do that, like, and they're like, oh, this looks too good to be hand brushed. The blend on this is too good.
Right.
This had to be airbrushed. And then when you found out, you're like, oh, that's pretty advanced. And I remember those people got rewarded for that. Like an airbrushed army was like, people were like, oh yeah, this is crazy. Look at the skill this guy has. And that's because no one was doing it. And then it caught on relatively quickly, and then I would say, I don't know.
You go from like your early adopter. Like everyone had, a group of maybe 5 people, one person's picking around.
It seemed to be like one of those things where you were like, the average person was like, oh, you got to be pretty serious to airbrush because of the costs and like the know-how and
the setup and where you do it, and that's where all those considerations.
You kind of felt like this guy's like a little crazy. Look at him, he's like airbrushing things.
What our friend used to say, he's like, oh, I need like a whole workshop to do it.
Yeah, they literally said something like that. Yeah, they're like, I can't just airbrush, I need to like set up this space. And, you know, because you think of like, you auto default to the idea of like, someone with like a paint gun in their hand, and they have
spraying
like this
car,
and they have this crazy like vented booth, and it's in an industrial type of or garage or whatever, or workshop. It's not something you think you would just do on your like at your hobby space at home or whatever. And so that was the thing. And then I remember it evolved. So I think we entered like just a little bit after that. I don't know, but Chris was like, I think we all got cheap airbrushes like around the same time. It was like probably around 2010 or 2009 or something.
Yeah, that's right.
When we started playing a lot of that were really deep into lots of games, 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, 9th Ed, and all that. And these armies are pretty big, and you're like, and I don't remember if our buddy John had one, and I don't know. I ended up getting one, and I was painting. I think the first things I airbrushed was like some Drukhari, and I airbrushed like a Raider or something, and I was like, oh my god, my life changed in a matter of 5 minutes or whatever when I realized that you can just like pour some paint, mix some paint with some thinner, and spray the broadside of your tank.
The first moment.
It's done in a second.
In your brain, you're like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I had this like weird sort of like stigma against painting vehicles too. Like I would always write my lists in 40K with as little vehicles as possible, because I hated edge highlighting doing all the.
You know what's funny though? I remember in our own little, because Chris and a few of our friends, there's like I don't know, half dozen of us. We've been having a hobby night like where we sit and paint for quite a long time, like over 15 years, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And it started in one of our basements or whatever. And I remember at the time there was like, when this airbrush topic was coming up, there was a bit of like, oh, that's overkill. Like, just use a brush or whatever, because we're so used to doing that. It's like, not hard. I just base coat it.
Yeah.
2 coats of paint, you'll be fine. So unnecessary to get all this hardware to paint a tank or whatever. But then once we started using them, they're like, oh, wow, this is the future pretty quickly. And then it proliferated, and then everyone was airbrushing. And I would say this was probably around when the store opened. I don't know, maybe before that, 2014, 15, 16.
Yeah, like our group, which, you know, we're pretty advanced hobbyists in general. Like, you know, people that have been in the hobby a while, most of those people had been adopting airbrushing in some form.
Yeah. And because it was just like, you could put significant dents in your projects pretty quickly, and so then it got a little crazy where it was like any 40K or big event you went to, it was like everything was airbrushed to the max, like to the point where you know, people would do 90% airbrush and only a tiny bit of hand brushing, and I guess like. And it looks pretty cool, but I don't know, at least for us, I think it got to a point where you're like, okay, man, the effort level is actually kind of low here. Because once you unlock that mystery of using the tool, you're like, well, you're just spraying 3 colors here.
Well, and here's
here's
the issue you get into, like, that you're describing, Will, is like, if you're like, take a Falcon Grav tank, right? Sure, if you can do the blue armor panel like really well, like 3 tones, you still have all the details to paint.
Correct.
So what Jay's describing is like, you know, you start blacking in or doing all your other stuff, and then people will just like leave those pretty untouched.
They would just
or they didn't have the brush skill to necessarily like make the other stuff look to the same quality. So you have this like weird sort of dichotomy on the model, right?
So there's your problem is like couple things. Usually airbrush paint, it's very thin. It's usually generally less shiny. Whatever the sheen of the paint is, it just looks more matte. And sometimes it has to do with the thinner that you use, and or the medium or whatever, So you get this thing where you have this like airbrush product, but like because nothing else is finished, and then you can't easily match any of that, because if you have a mistake or you want to blend 2 elements of a model together, if you don't have the brush skill or the color theory to color match between those 2, you just see you have like 2 completely different objects that don't go together, and they're next to each other, and you haven't found a way to like link them together. So often we got into this era of, and maybe this also is more prominent with like 40K blowing up in the sense that like it's like an esport now. Like there's like so much coverage and so much you can watch. You can watch 40K all day, every day on various channels and whatever. So people are like, I can get armies done quickly so I can like have the army of the week, and the army literally is the army of the week these days. And so so you got this two. I remember just walking around like all these armies, and it's just 3-tone airbrush, and the most weakest lame edge highlight that it's like not even
if
clean.
you're lucky. Yeah,
it's like messy, and then maybe they painted painted some gemstones or lenses, and that's it, right? And so then I would say we entered an era of we went backwards, where the quality of armies went down, or
in a weird way.
It was like a weird. I mean, on one hand, more armies were painted, but on the other hand, they got worse. And now it's kind of finally we've gotten into a part where I think it's people are harnessing the way it should be harnessed, which is like to do some of the steps, but not all the steps. It's a middle ground. I know for me personally, it's like I actually don't break it out as often as people think. Like a lot of people in the shop look at the cabinets and they default to like, is that airbrushed? And I'll be like, well, not really. So because I think we reserve it for more. There's some projects like I've got like a dragon. It's like a perfect subject because you just want to get all this like skin and stuff blended nicely or whatever, or the vehicles still. But I find on the infantry, it's like it almost takes me longer to do, or just as long to do that than if I just like. Sure, I think because of contrast paint and stuff. That
has obviously changed things quite a bit. They're almost like in a new phase where like contrast paint has also opened up a whole way to paint armies quickly as well. And so like, yeah, I think what you're hitting on there is interesting. Like, I think part of like learning how to use that airbrush and taking your hobby to the next level is incorporating it into how you like to paint. And I think a lot of people struggle, if we can even move that discussion into like maybe like things we wish we knew when we started, or like what stops people from airbrushing still today. I find a lot of people, like when they leave that model looking raw, the brushwork is still so important to almost like bring it to life after. So like when I'm airbrushing something, I always make sure I go back and I still shade with the brush and I still add highlights and texture to it. And then people have to actually come up and be like, is that airbrush? Because they're not actually sure because of the texture that's been added back in or whatever, right? Yeah. So I guess what would you say like is stopping people today in 2024 from airbrushing? Still,
well, I mean, the cost is still a thing. That hasn't gone away. I would say it's kind of fallen into. It's been around long enough. It's not like the 3D printers where like there's always another better, cheaper or whatever 3D printer every 6 months or whatever. It's like 3D printers are in a renaissance of that, where it's like the iterations keep happening. Airbrushes are kind of set, in my opinion. They're kind of like, you can release a new one, but like you're not reinventing anything new anymore. So they basically, they can be as cheap as you can get a package with a compressor as cheap as like $140 or $50 off eBay. That is like fine to start, but you'll quickly run through it, or the wear and tear will it'll be a casualty within 6 months.
Saying buy nicer, buy twice, or whatever.
It's exactly buy nicer, buy twice.
Which some people have to buy twice because like you just don't have the money to do it.
Sure. So there's that, and then you got like mid levels and all the way up to $600, $700, $800. But generally here at the shop, because with the Hardenstein Becks and things that we sell, it's on the cheap end it's like in the high fives or whatever, and then on the high end it can be up as much as 8 or 9 depending on how many extra accessories you buy. So we're talking like compressors and
going with a more premium brush,
air, the higher tier airbrush, the higher tier compressor, etc. You can definitely. That's the beauty of airbrushing in a way, though, is you can, if you buy just something right in the middle, it's like the difference between the middle and the high is like small. It's not a
in terms of output, like they do the same thing. They do the same thing. So it's really about the sort of like little things around the edges.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the thing, and then there was a bit of like, I would say this one is more of a mental thing. People always have this like idea. They still feel like it's going to be this incredibly messy thing. And airbrushing is a messy thing, but it's not as crazy as like I remember. Like often we're airbrushing here. It's just a box or something we use. Now this is one of those things that's like don't necessarily do what I do or Chris does. Because you probably should, wear masks and things like that, definitely. And the more ventilated your space, the better. And if you have people at home that are sensitive to
like we have a surgical grade air purifier that we run in the shop. So like it's picking up all the particles.
Exactly.
I would definitely recommend that, and if you have a smaller area to have something like that. But
generally speaking, it's just like your immediate area is going to get a little messy or whatever, and so it's not as crazy. Like the amount of space you need isn't as crazy as you think it is. And then if you throw some money at it, you can get a spray booth that'll take care of all of that. And so I think those are probably still the main. And then the next thing is going to be probably the learning curve.
Yeah, so for sure, yeah. And I think for me, getting started, we were all sort of on this like frontier together.
Yeah.
Our buddy John, who you can check out at Jonathan Home Miniatures, I believe is his handle thing on YouTube. He got into it like slightly before us, and so he had a little bit of kind of knowledge about it, but.
He's also an artist by trade.
So he
can pick that.
He would just pick it up and start to use it, and we're just like Yeah. I think for me, like going back, like if I could say the number one thing that I would do differently now if I was starting airbrushing, it's definitely not starting with like a really kind of crappy cheap tool, and it's not because it couldn't do the things that the more expensive tools could do. It was more that it made the experience something I didn't really enjoy, I guess. And I think I find them, for the most part, when the big objection I get with people, and the reason that kind of stops them all the time, and I felt this way too when I started, is if it's not working great, it's clogging a lot, it's difficult to clean, your experience is mostly negative every time you use it, and you just don't use it, or you don't want to use it. And that was kind of my experience for the first year or two while I had that like crappy master airbrush, which, like I said, it worked. I got some armies painted with it, but when I busted it out, I was like, ugh. As opposed to like now when I have like my CR Plus Infinity, it's like a joy to use, and I'm actually excited to use it.
You don't have that mental block.
And like I say, you don't need to buy an Infinity as your first airbrush. Like the nice thing about all the H&S airbrushes is they're like very simple tools that clean really easily. And they have very few components.
Product placement.
We're a little biased as the airbrushes we stock.
Sure.
But I think that is like a massive thing for beginners. Like people often, and we've said countless times, that we don't believe that beginner airbrushes are a thing.
No.
Necessarily. It's more of a philosophy.
It's a philosophy,
What people really say when they say beginner airbrush, I think, is what they mean is cheap airbrush.
Cheaper or whatever.
And, like all tools in life, the cheaper tool isn't necessarily going to be the easier tool to use. And I think that's just the kind of...
really, I like to, because again, like if you deconstruct what an airbrush is, it's like three components. It's like a little air valve that lets air in and out, and a needle and a nozzle, and the needle is just there to open the nozzle so that the air and paint can mix. And so this contraption, from an engineering point of view, has been solved a long time ago. So all you're doing by buying a starter or cheaper airbrush is buying literally a tool that's made out of the cheapest possible parts. Right. So where they're getting the cheapest metals or plastics, the cheapest gaskets, and the cheapest, most copyable design, or whatever you call it. So the more expensive airbrushes are like they use higher grade machining. The materials are robust. They use like much more. They use metals that don't crack or warp or deform and all those things. So
they put more protective coatings.
And so that's why I actually, most of the time, my analogy with them is like, that maybe sometimes works, is like Chris said, is like kind of like the power tool analogy or whatever. If you go to your hardware store and you've got the like $30 drill and the $150 drill and the $300 drill, all three of them can make that hole or drill that thing that you need to make. But one may literally burn out halfway through one project, and then the other one, the middle one, will probably last just fine throughout the time, and then the high end one probably just has some extra buttons and features that can maybe
or you might pass it down to your grandchildren.
Exactly. Sure.
My father-in-law has like these like tools, and like these are ancient. Like they still work.
They still work, right? So that's really all it is with the airbrushing, is like you spend you go as cheap as possible, and you're going to need to replace it, like almost guaranteed. So. And then for us here, like we've made a big part of the philosophy of selling the airbrushes, the particular ones that we sell, is the disassembly and cleaning has to be like bulletproof and very easy, because we've seen so many times and time again.
Yeah.
Almost, I mean, several times a year I'll have people come in and they're like, "Oh, my airbrush, it doesn't work, or something's wrong," and it's 99.9% of the time always it's a cleaning problem. It's always a cleaning problem, and they'll tell me they cleaned it or ultrasonic cleaned it. So here's another tip for your things you wish I knew or whatever. If you think you can just dunk your airbrush in some ultrasonic in a solution, an ultrasonic cleaner, and then come back to it and it's all good, it does not work that way. Please don't do that.
Yeah, you're also gonna you have to take out all your seals before you do
ruin
that.
The gaskets.
It's actually a really inefficient way to clean an airbrush.
It doesn't. So.
It doesn't take very long to clean an airbrush properly, only a couple minutes. You can actually check out, I did an Airbrushing 101 video channel on this. It's a little out of date, it's a few years old, but the nuts and bolts are still pretty good.
It's still good, we'll link it in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I'll add to like things that you really should consider if you're looking to buy an airbrush. Don't just look at the upfront cost of what the tool costs. Look into the replacement costs of like needles, nozzles, things that you're actually going to use. Like you're going to need to do nozzles and needles eventually. And I know that this is one of the big determinant factors between like people considering some of the different brands. Is like some brands, H&S, have really inexpensive needles and nozzles, and then other companies like Mawada, it's more in like the $40-$45 range, right? Yeah. And also think about like availability of parts and where you can get them and that sort of thing. Because the last thing you want is like you bend a needle, you're like, can't airbrush until I get a new needle, and where are you gonna get it from, right? So
make sure you have
stuff's out of stock all the time.
Reliable source. I find at least up where we are is like the water components are always out of stock. They're so hard to get. I don't know why. So that was another decision why we carry some of their airbrushes. They're great tools. I mean, it's basically Wada's a Japanese brand, fantastic, long history. And then Harder & Steenbeck is German, also has a great history. Like the quality's there. It's just we went with something that we could reliably source. And it's paid off, because like when I sell these tools to people, I'm like, look, you're gonna come back here 6 months. I'm always gonna have I triple stock needles, nozzles, and all the replacement and gaskets and those things that you need. And it's massive. Like guys have come down and they've been like, look, I need this so I can do a project this weekend, and they come and get their spare parts or whatever. That's a big deal. Because we've done I remember when we were using the cheaper airbrushes, it was like, you bent a needle, that's over. like it wasn't easy to find.
You're almost just bending the airbrush over it.
I think I did actually.
Worth $30 or $40. It's like
I think I literally bend. I kept the compressor, which was great, but I ended up bending the rest. So
that's what it is.
Yeah.
So long story short, if you skip to the end and you're still listening, our biggest advice is like if you're planning on doing the hobby going forward for any meaningful amount of time, and you paint big models or collections of miniatures, the airbrush is like, in my opinion, it's almost like a must buy. It just makes things more enjoyable. You get to the parts of the hobby that you kind of want to do. Like whether you're a gamer, it helps you get to the gaming faster with painted models. Or if you're a painter, it lets you get the steps on the model that you don't necessarily love doing, like the base coats, maybe quick highlights here and there, and you can actually just start refining and doing all the fun steps.
It allows you to do it was basically it was slap shop before slap job. And slap job is really just trying to do the airbrush thing without the airbrush, and obviously it's a technique or thing that's caught on, and a lot of people use it. But if you have an airbrush, you can do that and more, and it will just look better, because you don't have chalky dry brushing outlines. You don't have to bin your dry brushes every few months because you wear them into the ground. You can, and it does open up. You just get more tools and techniques and things that you can do, for sure. Cool.
Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye.